Hey everyone, this is Megan Hillier from Know Your Ancestors, and you're listening to the Know Your Ancestors podcast. Many of us have an innate desire to understand our roots, to know where we come from, and to understand the lives of our ancestors. On the show, I sit down with content creators and entrepreneurs to share some of the stories that I've uncovered and compiled about their own ancestors. Watch and listen as we discuss the traumatic and life-changing events of their close ancestors that helped shape who these guests are today. Welcome to the podcast today. I am sitting here with Georgette, and I'm so excited to introduce you to her, to hear more of her story, and then I'm going to share with her some things that I found about some of her ancestors. So, Georgette, before we get into that, can you just introduce yourself, tell a bit about your story, and then we'll get into your work and what you do.
Sure. Thank you so much, Megan, for having me. So, my name's Georgette Todd, and I live in San Diego. And I've had a very interesting childhood, and I was born to a teenage runaway. And because she was a runaway, she was in fear that my mother feared that she would be caught by the authorities. So she didn't even put her real name on my birth certificate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But my father's name is on my birth certificate. So she just made up an alias. And it's just interesting that to this day, my mom's real name's not on my birth certificate. So that's my opening. That's my origin story. Starts there. But she did, when she had me, and after, she was raised in San Diego, and she had me in Portland, Oregon. And then after that, she reconnected with her parents, which we're going to talk about today. And so then I was raised in that household with, my mother's side of the family. My mother and my father divorced when I was a toddler, but my mother raised me and my younger sister. In the first like 9 to 10 years of my life, I only knew one home, and that was the home that my mother grew up in. So when she ran away and had me for 2 years in Portland, she went back to San Diego to her childhood home and raised me for 9 years, pretty much on her own. But she wasn't really on her own because we were surrounded by family. So my mother's side of the family, her dad and her mother, my grandmother, who I think we're going to talk about today, who I know very little about, she died when I was 4 years old. But I remember being raised in, again, one house with my mother's side of the family. And should I just stop there? But that's what I remember, because we're
Mhm.
going to talk about that side of the family.
Yeah, we're gonna get into your great grandma on that side and your second great grandma. Yeah, so I know that you work with Connect Our Kids. Can
Yes.
you kind of go into that, how you started working with them, kind of that story and what they do?
Yeah, so I work at Connect Our Kids, and it's a technology nonprofit that's dedicated to maintaining connections between children in foster care and their families. And we provide affordable, easy to use, secure, scalable tools to help child welfare professionals discover and engage families, kin, and other supportive adults for the youth in foster care or a child who's at risk of entering foster care. And Megan, we aim to ensure that every child in foster care is connected with a loving, permanent home and a supportive network. We are relatively new startup. We've launched in 2020, but we've already served over 22,000 children so far, with over 645 family connections across 40 states and counting. And my role as the director of outreach for Connect Our Kids is I focus on engaging directly with our users. I gather feedback, I get testimonials, and like incredible life-changing stories of impact that our tools have had on these children's lives. So I, interview the child welfare professionals, interviewed like them in 19 states so far. And I just listened to their stories of how like the child's life was going. And then one day they started using our technology, and how through that process they like found relatives that they otherwise would never have found, and start engaging them. And then, and these families either, adopt these children out, or they're committed to being in their lives. And sometimes the family members can't take the child in for one reason or another, but they can still be a presence in the child's life and give ancestral knowledge, which I'm excited to hear for my own story today. So that's what I essentially do, is like I reach out, I engage our users, I get those stories, I interview them, and I write them for our blog that's you can access, or anyone can access, on our website,
Wow.
connectourkids.org.
Yeah. So I was introduced to Connect Our Kids at Roots Tech in 2023, I believe is when I went there, and how they're working with Family Search and helping them, create those connections, find those ancestors, find those relatives to help those foster children. I think it's an amazing organization. So I think that's a really important thing, that work that you're doing and that whole organization is doing. So I'm grateful to be able to talk to you about your own family. How much did you know about your family as a child? So you said that you were raised near your family till you were around like 9 or 10 years old. Did that stop around that age, or what happened there?
Yeah, so the reason why I'm interested in working, for foster kids is because I eventually became one. So my parents divorced when I was a toddler, but my mother remarried around the time I was 9 years old. And at that point, when she remarried to a man who I call Mad Dog, he was a biker. He had a misspelled tattoo. He had this bad boy kind of image. My mother was very young. Once they got married, they had a shotgun wedding in Las Vegas. Then shortly after, like we were, we moved far away from the only family and the only home I know. And so I was with me and my sister, with my mom, my young mother, who's in her 20s, and this man who's like twice our age. And we're moving all over. Like we went to a different state and then different parts of this California. And so I, at that point, became estranged from my family. I didn't know where they were. I mean, I knew that they were in San Diego, but I didn't have access to them. I wasn't calling them. I wasn't the internet didn't exist back then. And so I had no connection to them. And then once, after a few years of bouncing around, we settled in at the Salton Sea, which most people don't know about, but it's basically California's largest lake. And it's like a sea in the desert, but it's not really a sea, it's a man-made lake. And it's a very Bermuda Triangle vibe there. It's really post-apocalyptic. It's a really strange landscape. But that's that's the birthplace of my trauma. So at this point, after moving around a few years, I was 13 years old when drugs came into our home. And from there, our lives just became destroyed. And my stepfather was arrested, put away to jail. And there was just me and my sister and my mom, but my mother died shortly after his incarceration. And after that, my sister and I entered foster care. And that's a whole other. So we were completely divorced from family at that point.
So I'm sure you can see how a program like Connect Our Kids could have made a huge difference in your life.
Huge. I know for a fact, because I encounter stories weekly of children who had similar experiences to mine, and yet they had a worker who decided to use our tools, and they found relatives. A lot of times they didn't know where the child was at, or they didn't even know the child was in foster care, and they get reunited that way. So yeah,
Yeah.
if Connect Our Kids existed in my day, for sure I would have had a different outcome.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm.
All right. Well, you had said you wanted, when I reached out to you, you said you wanted to learn about your mother's line, your mother's family. And we'll talk a bit about why you were specifically interested in that as we go through it. But I'm going to be sharing about your second great grandparents. and then your great grandmother too. So
Oh,
can
great.
you see that there?
Yes, I'm so excited. Okay.
All right. I got a lot of information, so I'm like, I hope we can get through this. But I was gonna just share about your second great grandparents, but then I'm like, let's talk about our great grandma too. So here is your family tree, just showing your maternal line there. And we're going to be focusing on Minnie and Henry Helfers there, and then their daughter Matilda. All right, so Henrik William Helfers arrived in Honolulu, Hawaii on October 16th, 1882. This is your second great grandfather. So it's likely that these are his parents with him here. So we believe this is him, H.W. Helfers. He was 19. And then his parents, so H.F. Helfers and Mrs. Helfers. Okay. And then further down on the page, we have I think that says Sophie Helfers, who was 24, and then Amina Scharnhorst, who was 18. So these are, I believe these are your second great grandparents, Mina Scharnhorst here, and then H.W. Helfers. Okay, so they came to Hawaii in 1882 from Germany. You can see that their place of residence was Stocksy. I'm not sure how to say that in German, which is near Hanover. And I believe that that is where they were from. So I wasn't able to locate like birth records for them in Germany, but that is something that if you wanted to do further research, now we have that town of origin from where they're from, so that can help hugely to locate that. So this is near Hanover, Germany, is where Stocksy was. So other records had said that they were born in Hanover or were from Hanover. So I'm sure they just said Hanover on other records because it's, Stocksy was kind of a smaller location there. So Henrik and Mina Scharnhorst were married on December 7th, 1884 in Kauai, Hawaii. And then by 1890, Henrik was 28 and Mina was 25. This is a Hawaii census record. And they had two daughters by now. They had Matilda, who was 4, your great grandmother, and then Anna was 1. And Henrik was listed as being a farmer, and it's likely that he was working on a sugar plantation. So here is where they were living in the 1890 census with their 2 children in Laihu, Kauai. And I looked into why someone from Germany would have immigrated to Hawaii, and I found this article online explaining the history of that. So the Reciprocity Treaty of 1876 allowed Hawaiian sugar to enter the United States completely free of tariff duties. So this made people want to, cultivate more sugar, have more plantations because there wasn't that tariff anymore to export to the United States. So they needed more labor. They didn't have enough people to work on the plantations. So in 1880, they only had 90 laborers of the workforce of Laihu plantation were still 60% Hawaiian. But by this time, however, they knew they needed more people. So they enlisted a company in Germany, in northwestern Germany, to recruit people to come to Hawaii. And the Hawaii Immigration Board gave approval for all these immigrants and even sometimes subsidized the cost of the passage for women and children to come with them.
Mm-hmm.
So Henry and Mina were on the second ship of these Germans that came over to Hawaii during this time. So then 18 years after they had immigrated in 1900, they were still living in Laihu. I know I'm going to mispronounce all these Hawaiian places.
Lahui, yeah.
Lahui, okay.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this area? Like hearing about this?
It's so weird. So I've been with someone for the past 20 years, and every Thanksgiving except for the last few ones, we went to Kauai because his brother lives there. So I'm very
Oh, wow.
familiar with Kauai. Yeah, isn't that,
Interesting.
I mean, out of all the places, yeah, we go there for every Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Hmm,
So I am
that's
very
interesting. Well, you'll
familiar
have
with
to go visit.
Kauai. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to go visit some of these places.
Yeah.
So they had 3 children by this time, and all 3 were living. That's what this 3 here and 3 means. And the 2 others are on the next page of the census. But Henry was an overseer. So we know from other records that he worked on a sugar plantation. So I looked up what an overseer was, and this was kind of the ranking of overseers, what the ranking was with the workers there. So he was, just above like the laborers and supervisors, but he was someone that, oversaw the work that went on in the fields
And this
on
is
those
my
sugar
great
plantations.
grandfather, right?
This is your
Or
second great grandfather.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So then on that next page of that same 1900 census, we see the two other daughters that they had. And then we have his parents. So we have Frederick Helfers and Louise is his mother. So we can see that Louise had three children and only one is still living. So just Henry is the last child of hers that's still living. So then by 1910, they were living at, it says Camp 1 Makaweli. Makaweli? I don't know. This is
Oh,
a camp that was on another sugar plantation across the island, and Henry is now listed as being a policeman at the plantation. So he's now 48 years old. Mina is 44. They've been married for 25 years, and they have four children, and they're all four are still living. So just their two youngest daughters were still at home. They have Bertha, who was 16, and then Elsie, who was quite a bit younger, was just 1.5. So your great grandmother was gone by then. So
okay.
this is where they live. So they started out in the Hui. Is that how you said
Yep.
it?
Yep.
Lahui?
Lahui. Yeah.
The Hui. And then now they're across over near Lamai,
Waimea.
Waimea. There you go. In Makaweli. So this is an aerial photograph from 1929 of that sugar plantation in Makaweli. I just thought it was interesting to see what that would have looked like close to when they lived there. So now by 1920, Mina and Henry were living with their daughter Bertha and her husband Harry Burgess and daughter Harriet. So you can see it's kind of hard to read, but there's Henry Helfers and Mina. They got listed as border, but they're really the in-laws of Harry Burgess because there's Bertha, their daughter. They're now living in Honolulu, and Henry was a watchman, says watchman at an auto store. So I'm not sure where their youngest daughter would have been. She would have been about 11 years old in 1920, but she wasn't living with them, and I couldn't find where she was. But so by 1920, they had left the island of Kauai and are now in Honolulu on Oahu. So then by 1930, they were living in Waipahu, Oahu. Mina is listed as now Wilhelmina, so that could be her full name, which could be helpful to look for birth records or baptism records in Germany if you want to look for that in the future. It's possible that her first name was actually Wilhelmina, or the census record taker just took that down. I'm not sure. And then their daughter Elsie was also living with them with her husband Glenn Emmerich. And yeah, they were living in Honolulu. Not Honolulu, Waipahu. Yeah. And Henry was now once again working on a sugar farm as a policeman again. So Waipahu was just up here, a little bit northwest of Honolulu. So moving right along to 1940, Henry's now 77 and Mina was 74. And this census lists their highest level of schooling here, these numbers here at the last column. So they both completed 8th grade is what they recorded here. And then their grandson, Herbert H. Burgess, so the son of Bertha, was living with them also. And then just below there was their daughter Elsie and Glenn Emmerich are also living just like next door. These numbers here are tell how much their home was worth. I'm not sure why the last two digits got crossed out, but this O means that they owned their home and that it was worth $1,000. So I'm not sure why that would have got crossed out, and same here, but that kind of gives you an idea of what their home would have. I'm not sure how much $1,000 in 1940 is now, but probably not a lot. So they were living on P Road, which was part of this Damon Tract development, which was sold, and that's where the international airport is now. So where they lived was right where the airport is today. So 3 years later, in 1943, Mina passed away. Her four
Yeah.
children would have been 56, 53, 49, and 35. So they were quite older. And here's her obituary. So it says that her funeral took place at the Lutheran church. And you had mentioned that you were thinking that she could have been Jewish, and you shared why you thought that. Could you share
I
a bit of that story?
I'm so glad you're bringing this up. Okay, so last year I reconnected with my long lost uncle. So he was my sister or my mother's older oldest brother. And I have memories of him growing up in the first 9 years of my life. And so he and I, after years, decades of estrangement, we reconnected on Facebook last year. And we just got to talking, catching up. And he said offhandedly, "Oh, yeah, we're Jewish, right?" I said, "No. I mean, I don't have any denomination of, I'm not religious. I respect religion, but I don't, no, I wasn't raised with a religion, and that was never brought up. And but I like proof, I'm a writer, I write books, I have journalist background. I'm like, I need evidence. And so
Right.
that's why I came to you. I said, because I was like, is there a synagogue out there? I did some research. I didn't find anything. And so
Mm,
that's why I just wanted proof of, like, am I Jewish or not?
right.
Heffler's is an interesting, that's as a Jewish surname. I did look that up, but I need more than just a name, I guess.
Yeah, so I am not familiar with Jewish genealogy. So I asked someone who has helped on the podcast before, Kay Prince Hollenberg, to take a look. And she is a genealogist who specializes in Jewish research. So I sent her your tree, sent her what I had, and she said, I'll just read what she wrote me. She said, "So I've taken a look and I really don't see any evidence of Jewish ancestry here. She might try taking a DNA test, but my guess is that if it is there, it's further back or an NPE situation, which just means an unknown parent, you know,
Oh, okay.
that is not expected." I can't even remember what the NPE stands for. Not
Okay.
parent expected, I think. Yeah. So we know that Jewish genealogy comes through the mother's line. So it would have been through Mina if it was there, but as far as she could see, she couldn't see any evidence to show that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because he said, that my grandmother, his mother, would say, "No, we are." And that the reason why they hid it was because of anti-Semitism in the time period. And also she had, her stepfather was very abusive towards her mother, so my great grandmother. So and that's why it just wasn't talked about and hidden. So
Yeah,
he had no reason to lie about it. Like, it was just like,
right.
it's like in nothing. So, so I don't know. I think I'll have to still find out the truth.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I did like it did say that her funeral was at least a Lutheran church was where took place. So this is the Lutheran church that was in Lehui where they first came. And it seems like most of the Germans that came at that time would have been Lutheran, but Mina came by herself, right? She didn't come with her family, so maybe she
They didn't have
was.
a synagogue because I did, at that time period. So even if
Right.
there's no synagogue there.
Right. That's true. Yeah. So I just need to have more research done. Finding her baptism or finding her parents in Germany would obviously help with that. Right.
Okay. So I would have to look up Wilhelmina or Mina, a lifeline, like her parents.
Yep.
And okay. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. So Mina had passed away in 1943, and then her husband was living in 1950 with his daughter Elsie. So remember Elsie and Glenn Emmerich, and here's Henry Helfers living with them. So he is now 87 and widowed, and they were living up by the Halawa Ridge, just north of Honolulu there. And then Henry passed away in 1953 at the age of 90. So here's his obituary, and it lists his four daughters here and says that he had 17 grandchildren and 30 great grandchildren at the time of his death.
Wow.
Yeah, so I thought that was quite interesting to see how many descendants he had by that time. So I've shared with you kind of an overview of your great grandparents, your second great grandparents' life once they arrived in Hawaii in 1882. What are you feeling right now learning about them and a bit about their life and where they lived in Hawaii?
It makes me feel a little bit more like the, I feel like together, I guess. It makes me, it's like shaping my identity a little bit. I know that
Mhm.
sounds strange, but I feel like a box of puzzle pieces just kind of jumbled, and I feel like things like this, like it's like you're taking the puzzle pieces out of the box and putting it together. So this is what that feels like.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that
mean,
that makes
and I'm
sense.
just thinking about like all those descendants, like they're alive today. That's a lot of people. And so
Hmm.
it's like I have, when I'm in foster care, when a child's in foster care, it's like, oh, because they don't have family. No, it's not true. They do have family. You just got to find them. But in
Yeah.
my time, they didn't have the technology like they do now.
Mhm. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
this is interesting.
Yeah. So I can imagine, like, what do you think their life would have been like leaving Germany, especially your second great grandma? Seems like she left her family behind and came to Hawaii and starting all over. What do you think that might have been like for them?
Well, I think it might have been tough for them. I don't know, like the environment. Obviously, going to a different country is always hard. But I also know Hawaii. It's beautiful out there. The climate,
Mhm.
it's just paradise. So at least they had that. And if they had jobs, and if they had each other, it seems like a big family. So I feel like they had a lot going for them.
Yeah.
May
Yeah.
they not have been rich because of the, only $1,000 home or something, but
Hmm.
no, a great climate, family. I haven't seen any arrest records. I don't know. And one's a police officer, so and they're
Yeah.
homeowner. So I
Yeah.
think they sound responsible.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. When I think of where my ancestors could have settled, Hawaii doesn't seem too bad, where you could have immigrated to.
and also the fact that they had a lot of kids
Hmm.
tells me like that they could afford to have kids. So
Hmm.
that many, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I'm sure they had quite a community too. Like they weren't the only Germans that came at the time. So I'm sure there was kind of a community that was created when they came.
it just
All
it just
right.
needs Hefflers,
Oh, yeah.
so the name. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Well, would you like to learn about your great grandmother now? Their oldest daughter,
absolutely.
Matilda. All
Yes.
right.
And that's my
Okay.
great grandmother, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So in 1909, Matilda married William Robert Whittingham Jr. So she was 22, you can see here, and he was 28. And they got married in Lihui.
Yep.
She was oldest in her family, so by 1909, well, by 1910, that census, all the other kids were still living at home, but she was not. So in 1910, you can see that Matilda and her husband were actually living next door to her parents. So right above where her parents were is Matilda and William Whittingham. So they were both living at that camp at the sugar plantation in 1910. And her husband, William, was a machinist at the sugar mill.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. So then your great grandmother, Matilda, had their first child in December of 1910. So they had a son. It's kind of hard to read his name, but Richard Sterling Whittington was born December 14th, 1910. And he was born in Honolulu. So they must have moved from Kauai to Oahu shortly after that census was taken because they were in Oahu before. You can see that Matilda was 23 at the time of his birth. So this is where things get a little bit interesting. So in 1920, I couldn't find Matilda in the census anywhere. The federal census is taken every 10 years. And so I expected to find her somewhere in 1920. I was looking for her children, so I found a Richard Whittington who was age 9, born in Hawaii, living at this Viheo boys' home in California. I was like, that's kind of weird. Why would he be living over there? Is that the right one? I don't know. But I looked into what this boys' home was. So originally, there was a man named Edwin Neal who was a superintendent of orphanage in Viheo, and it was shut down after reports of abuse and even a murder allegation. And in 1915, the same Edwin Neal opened up the Viheo Boys' Home and Trade School. So this is the place that Richard Whittingham went to in Viheo, California. And it operated until 1920, so sometime after this. So this 1920 census was taken in January. So it probably closed down later on that year. So I still wasn't sure, is this actually Matilda's son, Richard? I'm not sure. But then I found this. So I found a William Whittington. So this would have been Matilda's husband, living as a lodger in Viheo, California in 1920. This is his birthplace, was listed as Hawaii. His father's birthplace of England, his mother's is France, which on other records we know that that's the same. And he was a machinist for the US Navy. So that sounds like him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like, I don't know, maybe he took his son with him for a time to California and his son stayed at this boys' home. I'm not exactly sure, but they did return to Hawaii afterward because there was other records of them in Hawaii later. And I still was not able to locate Matilda or her two daughters in the 1920 census anywhere. So I'm not sure if they were also in California somewhere or if they stayed in Hawaii, but have to do more research to find that out. But I did find this. So later that year in 1920, Matilda and William divorced. So you can see this is just a list of all the divorces in Honolulu. So you can see it says Matilda H. Whittingham, Whittington against William R. Whittington, alleged non-support. So this was in October 1920. So at this point, their children were 9, 5, and 3. So they got divorced that year. So I'm not sure if William had left to California and that's why this relationship started going south. I'm not sure, but something happened. They ended up getting divorced in the fall of 1920. So then 2.5 years later, Matilda, this one's kind of hard to read too. So you can see Henry J. Martin and then Matilda H. Whittington, age 35. They got married in 1923 in Honolulu. So you can see Matilda was 35 and then Henry Martin was 28. So you can see that she's also listed as divorced here. So this is their marriage record in 1923. You can also see that her sister Elsie and husband Glenn Emmerich were the witnesses for that wedding. Okay, so by 1930, so 7 years later, Matilda and Henry had 3 more children. So she had 3 children with her first husband, William Whittington. So she had Richard, Helen, and Alice. And then she had 3 more children, Lillian, Annie, and Rose, with the second husband, Henry Martin. So you can see Helen is living with them still. She's 15, and then there's these younger 3 that she had with her second husband, Henry Martin. So they were living in Honolulu, and Henry Martin was a marble setter. And Rose is your grandmother, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so she was about 3.5 for the census in 1930. So then by 1940, your great-grandmother Matilda, whose middle name was Dorothy, and that's the name she's listed under here, is living with her oldest daughter Helen and her husband George McClellan. And then there's the 3 other younger children here. So Lillian, Anne, and Rose, your grandmother. So your grandmother Rose was 13 at this time, and these numbers here are the highest grade level they'd completed. So she had completed 5th grade. And you can see that her mother Dorothy had only completed 5th grade. And you can see those numbers there for the other siblings. But they were renting a home, that's what this R means here, for $25 a month. And Helen, so Dorothy's oldest daughter, Helen, was a waitress. And then Helen's husband was a truck driver. So you can notice that Matilda, or Matilda Dorothy, that was her full name. Her second husband, Henry, is not living with them, but she's still listed as married here, this M here. And I think that's a little two by it to show that it was her second marriage. So she still is married and she's 52 years old. So then by 1950, your great grandmother was living on P Road, that same house that her mother was living at the time of her death 7 years earlier. So her mother, Mina, was living there in the 1940 census. And then on her obituary, it also said she was living there. So this is the same house, but she's living there with her daughter, Helen, and her second husband, William Coons, and then Helen's son, Dennis McClellan. So that was a son from that first marriage. And then here's Matilda Martin. And you can see she's 63 years old. And now her marriage status says SEP, or for separated. So
Wow.
she's living there, and she may have separated earlier because she wasn't living with her husband in 1940, but here in 1950, it's at least written there.
Hmm.
And then here's her obituary. So Matilda, your great grandmother, Matilda Dorothy, or Dorothy Matilda, is what she's written as here in her obituary. She died at the age of 74, and it lists her 5 surviving children here. So it just says Mrs. Martin is survived by 5 children. So it lists all of them. Helen had remarried again because now she's married to Victor Boyd. And then Alice was the daughter from her first marriage, I believe. And then we have Lillian, and then Rose, your grandmother. And then there was another daughter, Annie, but she passed away in 1953 in California at the age of 28. So, all right. Well, that is what I have to share with you. I know that this has been a lot to share with you. What are your thoughts that you've had as we've gone through this presentation here?
Well, I'm just like following the line
Mm-hmm.
and trying to like fill in the blanks, like for
Mm-hmm.
example, like why was my, you know, like it's, I don't know that I'm having a hard time placing who's who, but like
Yeah.
it was like the one who went into the orphanage. Like who was he to me?
Richard.
Richard.
So
Yeah.
he would have been your grandmother's half brother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, because and I found out later, my biological father, he ended up in foster care too. So I'm just like, wow, I'm seeing like a theme here.
Yeah.
Separation,
Yeah.
family, and this line of being an orphanage. So that's what I'm very interested in. I really would like to know if I want to verify what my uncle told me about the Jewish ancestry, that but you gave me enough to go on, and I'll continue to research that
Yeah.
too because I would like to
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah.
But I'm also, yeah, I'm just like it it feels sad.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
feels sad, yeah.
Yeah. So I think sometimes when we look at our families and we see signs of trauma, there's divorce,
Yeah,
separation, things that happened. But looking at like generational trauma, it's interesting to look at what happened to your ancestors before your ancestral line was conceived. So, especially with the women, like we know through epigenetics and studies like that generational trauma is actually a real thing passed down genetically. Um, so, looking at like what happened in your line before your line was conceived, because it would have to happen before to be passed down genetically, right?
right,
So, I thought it'd be interesting to kind of just look through your family, considering what happened at each of those for each of those generations there. So like thinking of your second great grandmother, Mina. So she left her home of Germany in 1882 when she was 18 years old. She left all she had known. From what I can see, she left her family and never saw them again. And then 2 years later, she married Henry. And then 3 years later, had her first child, your great grandmother, Matilda. They lived on a sugar plantation. I'm sure money was scarce, and Matilda was the oldest child. So, what do you kind of think about that? How that might have been?
I keep just getting stuck at her being 18 on her own, crossing an ocean, and just starting her way in life without any family. And that
Yeah.
is something what I experienced, but
Mm.
lower in that, when I turned 18, I went off, just, Northern California, and I was
Mhm.
by myself, no family, nothing.
Mm.
It was just me.
Mhm.
And just to start your life out like that. But there were more resources in my day than there was in hers, I'm sure. So I don't know. I wish there was how would I go about finding out more? I guess maybe trying to track down the descendants and asking
Yeah.
them,
Yeah,
maybe.
you can see if they have information. I did come across some public trees on Ancestry, but none of them really had any more information than what I found. So, but there could be some that it's just not on there, right? That people haven't put it on. But
How would I find out Mina's like her life in Germany? Because clearly
Mhm.
something, I mean, unless there were anything happening during that time period is that normal for, I always hear families, but of a
Mhm.
young woman, like 18 years old, just starting
Mhm.
anew, like,
Yeah. It seems like she traveled with her future husband's family, so maybe they were kind of already
oh,
together. I'm not sure, but she was listed right next to another Helfers, which could have been a sibling of Henry's. So that could have kind of played into it. Maybe there was a romantic relationship and she left home with him. I'm not sure, but to find more about her life in Germany, you'd need to locate records there. And there is a lot to go off of. I'm not familiar with German research, but I know some genealogists that are, and then you can always learn how to do it on your own too. But it is quite difficult German research because it's all in German, first of all, and to know how to navigate those records and searching for them. But we can definitely talk about that later if you want.
I
But
would love to. Yes.
yeah,
And now it makes sense, the romantic reason why that I was like, okay, now I
yeah,
get it.
yeah, yeah. It could be
Yeah.
why. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So then going down another generation, we look at Matilda, right? Your great grandmother. So before your grandmother Rose was born, she had quite a lot that went on in her life, right? So she married William Whittington at the age of 22. They had 3 children. There was some rockiness there. They divorced 11 years later, and then she had 3 young children at that time. That was probably hard. We don't exactly know their circumstance, but other than that claim of non support, whatever that meant. And then Matilda married Henry Martin and had 2 children before your grandmother Rose was born in 1927. And then they were separated by 1950 officially, but who knows what happened before that. So, do you know much about your grandmother Rose's childhood or anything? I know you said that she died when you were 4. Was there anything told to you about her?
What my uncle said was that she had a tough time growing up. Her she said her stepfather. So I wouldn't know who that would be.
Yeah, I did hear when you wrote that. I was like, I wonder who that is because,
Yeah. It seems like she grew up with her dad. So
yeah,
Martin, right? Martin.
right. Yeah,
So
Henry. So
maybe he came back into
unless there
the life.
was, there could have been another relationship in between censuses. Maybe it was just a boyfriend, like maybe it wasn't
Yeah. But that was
a
the
marriage, but
story told to me, was that, there was alcoholism, and it was just really tough. And
mm,
because I said, why didn't she embrace her Jewish heritage if she was
mm,
Jewish? That was the question I asked. And
right.
then he said because a large part was because of seeing how her mother, Matilda, was treated, who we see as Martin here, but was born Heffler's. And I don't want to repeat the words, but it was really hard. You Jewish, fill in the
Right.
blank, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And so she grew up with that. And so it was just hidden. And then, but when I look at a photo of her, she does look like East, what a part of Europe that,
Mm,
I mean, I don't look like her.
mm,
So it's just very interesting. Like,
yeah.
it's so strange. I don't know. And then
Mm,
Hawaii on top of that too.
I know.
So yeah, it's very
Have you
interesting.
had your DNA tested, your ancestry?
I have, and it says a lot of like Irish and well, that's more my dad's side, but
Oh,
there's
okay.
also my mother's side too, but like Irish and some Scottish, but there's other stuff too. So, but I didn't see any, but then I've been on it long enough to where it changed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it
they do
changed a
change.
couple times. So I'm
Right.
like, is this not a, I thought this was an exact science, but I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah, the ethnicity part is kind of a probabilities kind of thing, like how likely it is to be similar to people from there, kind of thing. So it's not an exact science for that. So sometimes it's totally off and you know it's off, but sometimes it can give you some insights maybe. But
It doesn't seem like they were a religious folk. I mean, no matter
mhm,
what, it doesn't,
yeah.
I mean, that came across too in my
Hmm.
lineage. I don't see that. And that was on both sides of my family.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's just like there's no togetherness. It just, there's a lot scattered.
Yeah.
That's what's coming across to me and listening to all this is a lot of scattering about.
Hmm. Yeah. And it seems like those first, your second grade grandparents, they seem pretty unified, especially
Hmm.
like they live near lots of their daughters throughout the years too. But then after that, things kind of,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
went. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder what happened there,
Yeah.
what the breakdown was there. So yeah.
Yeah. So, how are you feeling about these women in your family tree as you've learned a bit more about their lives? You said you felt kind of similar to Mina, your second great grandmother, about how she left home at 18 all on her own. Is there any other things you're feeling as you think about these three women in your tree?
Well, it's complicated with my grandmother because I do have memories of her and they weren't great. So,
Mm,
but then after hearing what she went through in life, I'm not excusing it, but I can understand it.
yeah,
So I have a little more compassion towards her. Matilda seems really an interesting it just seems like I don't know, I don't see a lot of women around her. I don't see a lot of seems like she did a lot of stuff on her own. So I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. I mean, I don't like it's just to me is sad and I just have more questions. But yeah, it's the Mina is very interesting to me. The fact that even though she had, I mean, to leave everybody behind. I mean, if she didn't, I wouldn't be here, you know?
right. Yeah.
She if she just stayed in Germany.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think it can provide, like, a lot of us. I grew up knowing a lot about my ancestors, and so I've heard like stories, and there's things that can fill in the gaps. You know, some had journals, and even that can help us understand a bit more about their lives. So it can be hard when we just have, like, I showed you a lot of census records, right? Like
Yeah, and that's
that,
all I have,
that's
except
what we
my
have, right?
that's it.
Right.
Except
So then you have to kind of fill in the gaps and be like, I wonder what their life was like based on what we do have, and can kind of start thinking about who they were, what it might have been like in Hawaii at that time. You know, I didn't even talk about the wars going on, and Pearl Harbor, like all of that. I'm sure that affected them too. Just considering those types of things can give you a bit more of a glimpse into their lives to help you feel a bit more of a connection to them. But
yeah, I get because again, I didn't grow up with these stories and
mhm,
don't know a lot about my family and then just some testimony from my uncle from last
mhm,
year. But other than that, and what you're presenting to me today, that's all I really know, except one other thing. You mentioned earlier Henry Martin, or I
mhm.
believe it, or Heffler's. It was
Well, Henry Helfers was your second great grandfather,
right.
and
So
then
yeah, the one who was a marble, what was he did as a marble
oh, Marble Setter,
oh,
yeah. So Henry
setter?
Martin, yeah, that married was
Yes.
Matilda's second husband. Yeah.
Tilda's second husband. Okay. I did hear from my half aunt maternal half aunt that I've never met, but I found her or she found me on ancestry.com a long time ago.
Hmm.
She told me that we had a relative who helped set up a lot of the statues around Honolulu And
Oh,
so,
really?
yes, and she did, she brought that up. And so for
Hmm.
you to verify that, that's pretty,
Right.
yeah,
Oh, cool.
that's a thread I can pull on.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, neat. Yeah. Well, Georgia, I have loved talking to you and sharing a bit more about your family with you. I hope that it helped to not just give you more questions, but hopefully helped you to feel a bit more connected to these people in your family tree. I'd love to help people know a bit more about Connect Our Kids, what you do there. How can people get involved with that organization?
Thank you so much for bringing that up. So, yeah, because Connect Our Kids actually essentially is preventing more Georgettes in the world, more, more people who are so disconnected from family and then they just age out and they have nobody. So we
Yeah.
really work to not have that happen again.
Mhm.
For people to, we are a nonprofit, which is
Mm.
unheard of for technology. When you hear technology, it's for profit, but we are a
Right.
nonprofit and it's expensive. So we are very grateful for any donations, support that we can get. For people want to find out more about what we do, you can go to connectourkids.org.
Mhm.
And again, www.connectourkids.org. And you can also read the stories that I write of children who are reconnected to their families.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Georgette, for agreeing to come here and letting me share this with you. It's been so fun.
Thank you so much, Megan. I'm
You're
deeply
welcome.
appreciative. Thank you again.
Thanks so much for listening to the podcast today. If you could leave a rating and review, that would be great. This is how people can find the podcast and get more people to listen and to understand the power of knowing their ancestors. If you want to learn how to do this yourself, how to build your family tree, or how to learn the stories of your ancestors, you can go to knowyourancestors.co to find my 2 courses that are available to purchase. Know Your Family Tree takes you through understanding how to build your family tree and how to research it. This is the basis for how you can find information and stories about your ancestors. And then my more in-depth course, Know Your Ancestor, where you can learn how to look at records differently, how to find those pieces of information that tell your ancestor story, to consider what trauma they might have experienced, what resilience they had in face of their challenges, and can help you really understand yourself in the process. So you can go check out both of those courses on my website, knowyourancestors.co.